Hello, my name is Jean-Jacques Nantel. In my last video on Donald Trump, I explained that rich people tend to put the normal values upside down in order to be able to waste as much resources as they want without feeling any remorse. When I say that, some people always ask me, what do you mean by normal values? Normal values are values like self-control, honesty or courage, or if you want, all values that make people produce more than they consume in a universe where everything rusts, rots, and crumbles without any human intervention. When you have normal values, you work hard, you don't waste, you raise kids, etc. If all our families have survived since the beginning of our life form 4 billion years ago, it is because evolution gave us everything we needed to survive in a world full of dangers. The most primitive brain evolution gave to our ancestors was equipped with a reward mechanism based on pain and pleasure. Pain to punish those who failed in the fight for survival, and pleasure to reward those who succeeded. The next step in evolution, at least for human beings, was to develop what biologists called our neocortex, that second brain which is on top of our primitive brain and whose function is to produce rational thoughts. Our neocortex is the most intelligent part of our brain. This is where have been invented all the artificial tools that made us the masters of the world. When our first human ancestors began to think, they had no idea that this universe had laws. Of course they saw that the moon and the planets regularly came back in the sky, or that the seasons came back always in the same order, or that the migrations of the wild animals they were hunting followed regular patterns. But for them, the rest of the world was a total chaos. With the development of civilization, however, some thinkers began to realize that there were many more rhythms and symmetries in this universe than previously thought. The Greeks were the first to discover and to prove with rigorous demonstrations that our world was governed by natural laws. Science was born. It's easy to show how the Greeks proceeded to make such a revolutionary breakthrough. If you take 7 similar round objects, their nature and their size are not important, and if you regroup them in a very tight pack, you will always obtain a regular and perfect hexagon. There is clearly here a natural geometric law at play. When the Greeks realized that, they tried to prove it, and they succeeded by using geometric theorems. By applying the same rigorous method in multiple domains, the Greeks showed that the truth really exists, that it is coherent, understandable, and more importantly, that there is only one truth. They showed that 2 totally contradictory statements cannot be both true at the same place and at the same time. Unfortunately for mankind, science came to a standstill when the Greco-Roman civilization became so rich and decadent that it finally collapsed. If between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Italian Renaissance, science has not been developed to its full potential by Muslims, it is because science has always been a foreign body inside of Islam. For the Muslims, the truth was and still is what they find when they read the Quran, rather than what they would find by studying nature. For them, if reality contradicts the book is right and reality is wrong. As a result, any scientific progress was made very difficult. This is the reason why science came back to life only after the Westerners went to work on it at the end of the Middle Ages. especially after the development of the scientific method. A method so rigorous that it forces any thinker to reveal how he made certain discoveries so that anybody else could redo his experiments and get the same results without any interference whatsoever. The scientific method is so efficient to discover the truth that we now know certain almost unbelievable things. For instance, we now know with an extreme precision the masses of the sun, of the earth, and of the moon. We didn't put them on a balance, and we didn't guess their weight like circus magicians sometimes do with people. No, we measured their weight by using the equations of physics. And the result is absolutely certain, since it is totally coherent with everything the other sciences have discovered about this universe. Another example, physicists know for certain that quarks do exist, even if they never saw a proton, which is made of quarks, or a carbon atom, for example, which is made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Thanks to the scientific method, modern scientists even made discoveries concerning the atomic world that defy common sense. Listen to that, because it's astonishing. Nowadays, we have the absolute proof that an electron can be at two places at the same time. We also know that when an electron passes from one orbit to another inside an atom, it never passes through the space between those two orbits. The electron goes from one orbit to the other, bang, bang, without any transition. This is called a quantum leap. It seems unbelievable, but this is reality. It's proven. If experimental science allowed us to understand and use much more efficiently the laws of our universe, it also had an important sociological downside. It made Westerners so rich that since the Second World War, they degenerated, culturally speaking, and became decadent. It happened to them exactly what happened to the ancient Greeks and Romans. As I said in the last video, the baby boomers never had to work very hard to accumulate wealth. Their ancestors had done that for them, and they never suffered. Most of them never experienced negative emotions as powerful as fear, anger, or anxiety. This is why they used their intelligence not to avoid danger and suffering like their forefathers, but to get as much fun as possible. And to make sure they wouldn't feel guilty about it, they invented a consumer ideology called political correctness, which considers good almost everything their ancestors considered evil, and evil what they thought was good. Two important remarks must be made here. First, decadence is so efficient to bring back poverty that it is rarely something very spectacular. It's a very relative phenomenon. As I said elsewhere, in all human societies there are always cowards, drunkards, sluggards, as well as brave, hard-working individuals who raise many children and save money to pay for their studies. If a society contains very few decadent people, it grows and thrives. But if it contains a lot of them, it degenerates, it crumbles, and finally disappears. For instance, the modern Western world is presently collapsing, even if the majority of its citizens do have kids and work 8 hours a day. Even in our postmodern, politically correct society, it is rare to meet people who voluntarily disfigured themselves with face rings, face tattoos, and multiple piercings. The second remark that must be made is that many Westerners were already decadent at the beginning of the 20th century. Painters, sculptors, and musicians had already abandoned the rules and the techniques developed in the past in order to become more creative. If that quest for creative freedom made possible the creation of many masterpieces, it also allowed countless ignorant artists without any proper formation to produce extremely bad paintings that snobs would make famous by feigning admiration. It's probably in Hollywood that the Western decadence reached its peak at the beginning of the 21st century. When you watch a movie made in Hollywood, it is normally easy to guess when it was shot, because with the passing of time there has been a steady increase in the number of scenes where the hero uses drugs, sleeps around, kills or steals without ever being caught, and does all sorts of things that our ancestors would have found immoral. The nouveau riche of Hollywood degenerated so much during the 20th century that nowadays many Hollywood stars prefer adopting children rather than making their own. In other words, they are doing the exact opposite of what natural selection has been doing for 4 billion years. They choose sterility and want to be admired for it precisely because they are among the healthiest, youngest, and most beautiful individuals on this planet. Normally, it should be people with bad genes who adopt children, not Charlize Theron, Sandra Bullock, or Madonna. Since there were always rich people in the Western world, political correctness existed much before social scientists gave it a name or tried to make something coherent with all that nonsense. At the beginning, social and human sciences were real sciences that honestly studied facts and data. Many of those sciences still do. For instance, linguistics, archaeology, or demography, where political controversies are rare. Many researchers working in the other social sciences are also honest and rigorous thinkers, and many researchers made in controversial disciplines like sociology or anthropology are also valid. However, that honest part of social and human sciences is what remains of the epoch where their specialists use the scientific method to find out how human societies really work. If, during the 20th century, those disciplines stopped being rigorous to become pure political weapons, it is for two very fundamental reasons. First, disciplines like history or sociology are so complex that it is very difficult to discover the natural laws that govern them. In those disciplines, it's extremely easy to build theories based on carefully chosen facts in order to defend the interests of certain pressure groups. The second reason why those disciplines could be so easily perverted by modern liberals is because they are not real sciences. In science, researchers must always remain neutral when they study facts, which is almost impossible when humans study humans, especially when they deal with facts that could have important social and political implications. Just think about the studies concerning the relationship between race and intelligence. Those two fundamental defects of social and human sciences facilitated their invasion by dishonest and decadent politically correct ideologues whose objective was to hide behind the authority of science to impose to our societies their upside-down values. For those scientists, intellectual honesty is not to say the truth, but to defend the interests of the pressure groups they like. This is the reason why nowadays we find black studies and feminist schools of thought in sociology don't look for any kind of scientific objectivity in them. The conclusions of all their studies have been decided before their very first field study. What a joke. In real science, researchers come ever closer to the truth by eliminating what is false. Nuclear physicists would lose all credibility if there was among them a pacifist school of thought that would try to impede any research on critical mass or chain reactions under the pretext that any progress in those fields would facilitate the creation of nuclear armament. It is extremely easy to give examples of intellectual dishonesty in social and human sciences. For instance, the feminist school of thought in sociology regularly produces studies based on the idea that men are responsible for the underrepresentation of women in many fields of activity. If it's true that men are often sexist, it is also perfectly obvious that they are not at all responsible for the natural handicaps of women. If women never compete against men in sports or at the Olympics, it's not because they are unfairly treated, but because, on average, they are smaller, weaker, and slower than men. If feminists were intellectually honest, they would also admit that, unlike men, many women are weakened every month by their periods, and that they have to carry and give birth to all the children of the species. And how can they ignore that when there is a divorce, women fight with everything they have to get the custody of their children, a move that forces them to spend a lot of time and money to raise them alone? By the way, male sociologists also have the moral obligation to admit that boys are less successful than girls in school, that men are much more violent, that they commit almost all the rapes and violent crimes, and fill 90% of the world prisons, that men are by far the main users of prostitutes and pornography. And what am I doing here? I'm crazy. Feminists are right. I'm a man. I should never admit those facts because it could be detrimental to my male interests. Historically, it has been when the first baby boomers reached adulthood during the 1960s that the propagandists of political correctness launched their first coordinated attack on Western universities. Very successful in all social science departments, those attacks were to fail miserably in pure science departments where everybody understood that, scientifically speaking, what liberals were then saying was pure nonsense. Imagine, the teachers of social and human sciences went as far as saying that the truth doesn't really exist, that any scientific statement is just a matter of opinions, points of view, or interests. I'm sorry, but since Euclid 23 centuries ago, mathematicians have the absolute proof that the quantity of prime number is infinite. Modern astrophysicists know for certain that the Earth is a sphere, that it revolves on its axis and moves around the sun. And doctors know that the heart pumps the blood, not the liver, not the brain, or the right thumb. And that it would still be true even if William Harvey, who discovered it, had been what feminists call a racist, male chauvinist pig. In countless domains, pure sciences have discovered universal and permanent truth. For instance, we know that there are only about 100 stable atoms in this universe, that all snowflakes have an hexagonal shape, and that the angle between the two hydrogen atoms in a water molecule is always the same, etc. I will add that in real sciences there are no heresies or witch hunt. It doesn't exist a Nazi biology, a Bolshevik chemistry, or an Islamic astrophysics. There is only science. If scientists sometimes hate and denigrate certain colleagues, they all admit that their common goal is to find out how this universe really works. The funny thing about the promoters of political correctness is that they actually believe they are the future, even if they know, as well as I do, that their consumer values, promoting perversions, drugs, etc., will soon provoke the collapse and the disappearance of their world. It's all the more certain because the environmental crisis that already began will bring back poverty all over the world, terminate the Western decadence, and force everybody to go back to the producer values of our ancestors. And among those values, there will be scientific objectivity and intellectual honesty. If dead religions never resuscitated in the past, science did more than once, because it is based on proven facts. The truth really exists. Now it is time to talk about subscribing to my channel, recommending this video to your friends, and to give it the thumbs up. Bye.